Hello. Is someone making an email chain? Or I can make it because I think everybody else's email's in the chat. All right, perfect. Sent it out. Did everybody get the email chain?
Yeah, I got it, but I didn't. If you sent me a doc, I didn't get it one.
Oh, no, shoot. Yeah, let me send that. 1 second.
Yeah, I'm good too.
All right, I sent over a doc as well. Once everybody gets that, I'm good to go. We got it? All right, perfect.
My partner hasn't got it yet.
Oh, sorry. Just let me know.
Okay, I just got it.
All right, perfect. We negate contention 1 is big tobacco. Verdict 21 writes that federal marijuana legalization will invite industry behemoths to eat up small companies and push minority-owned firms out. It could immediately expose every existing state market to a frenzy of national competition and disrupt hard-fought local policies. Copeland 13 warrants that conflict between federal prohibition and state legalization measures will allow the industry to grow at a continued reasonable pace, as large-scale financial institutions will hesitate to support investors in a federally prohibited industry. Unfortunately, Seeley states in 2014 that if legalization becomes a federal policy, big tobacco will end up dominating marijuana. The groundwork is already being laid in Canada, as Shigabe 21 explains, that big tobacco started to see the cannabis industry as a picklock to get out of dependence on tobacco sales. For example, Altria Group, a giant tobacco company, agreed to buy a 45% stake in the Canadian cannabis company Kronos Group in 2018. The next year, Imperial Brands announced an investment of $123 million into Oxley Cannabis Group, another Canada-based company. Big Tobacco turns marijuana into a public health crisis. Berry 14 writes that because of the industry's demonstrated ability and willingness to modify its products to increase addictiveness, obfuscate information, deceive the public, and use advertising to target vulnerable groups to increase demand, the industry also has the power to dramatically change the use of marijuana. The impact is widespread, as cigarettes are only deadly because of Big Tobacco's modifications. Procter 13 quantifies that the cigarette is the deadliest object in history, killing half of its long-term users. The reason is the cigarette industry's a powerful corrupting force. Contention 2 is cartels. Mexico's cartels control the movement of most foreign illicit drugs trafficked into the US, including heroin, fentanyl, cocaine, methamphetamine, and marijuana. With legalization, drug cartels will increase violence in 3 different ways. The first is diversification. Cartels shift into more profitable revenue streams that affect more citizens. Corocan 13 states that legalization would not be sufficient to address Mexico's current problems because the most logical substitute for trafficking is other illicit activities such as extortion, kidnapping, and bank robbery that often have a greater impact on civilians. Suddenly legalizing drugs may even increase the chaos. The second is fragmentation. Revenue loss causes struggles for control. As Rios 12 explains, that Mexico went from a stable, peaceful equilibrium into a violent equilibrium because of illegal market competition. When traffickers are captured or killed, the internal structure of criminal organizations destabilize, which provides further incentive for other organizations to try and take over. Competition has brought the country into a vicious cycle of violence. That's why empirically the breakup of cartels has led to massive violence. Satinga 14 finds that the explosion of violence in 2008 was because the Sinaloa cartel and its former partners began to fight against each other. But in 2011, things began to shift because competition had eroded. The Sinaloa cartel had largely won. When there is no competition in the black market, it's a great thing for peace. The impact is substantial. Jason 15 finds that killings in Mexico have outpaced the number of civilian deaths in Afghanistan and Iraq combined. In the war against cartels, more than 164,000 people have been victims of homicides. The third link is a continued black market. Cartels flourish in a legal drug market, as Morse 13 explains that it's highly unlikely that the U.S. would remove all restrictions, leaving the cartel business in those narcotics intact. Even legitimate drugs can spur illicit trade if they are in high demand, but the supply is tightly controlled. That's why Warren 12 finds that in California, the black market continues to thrive because cartels undercut price of legal products offered by farmers, blending in seamlessly alongside legal growth. Warren continues that major cartels continue to traffic billions of dollars of heroin, meth, and opioids into the U.S. and countries worldwide. They're flooding the streets with fentanyl, often pressed into pills to mimic prescription drugs, fueling overdoses that killed more than 100 million people during the pandemic. The cartels also infiltrated Kentucky, where overdose deaths rose by 49%, thus Quaylan's to negate.
Okay. We're gonna send the doc in email chain.
Also, just to clarify, there's no highlighting because there's a person on our team who can't read highlighting because they're colorblind. So what we do is we copy the actual text of the card and we put it right after we cite the card name. So it's not paraphrased or anything.
That's completely fine.
It just got sent over.
Okay, did you guys get it?
Not yet. I'm still waiting on the email.
Okay.
I still haven't gotten it. Is that just me?
Has anyone else gotten it?
Did you check if you maybe replied all?
Okay, yeah, we just replied all.
Okay, I just got it. Thank you.
Okay, is everyone ready? Okay. Contention 1 is HIV. The policies behind the war on drugs fuels the HIV crisis. OSF 21 writes the war on drugs is driving the HIV pandemic. Repressive drug law enforcement forces drug users from public health services. Injection drug use accounts for 1/3 of new HIV infections. Countries should immediately scale up sterile syringe distribution, safer injecting facilities, and prescription heroin programs. The fight against HIV is being won in countries where addiction is treated as a health issue. Legalizing drugs provides cleaner and safer injections, preventing new HIV transmissions. Pearl 18 writes, legalizing substance use is one consideration to begin treating drug misuse as a public health issue. Harm reduction strategies focus on preventing fatalities, disease, and other harms by promoting safer substance use, like syringe access programs and safe injection facilities. HIV threatens the lives of millions globally. Roser 14 writes, HIV has had a massive impact on health outcomes and life expectancy. Globally, it is the second most fatal infectious disease, and almost 1 million people died from HIV in 2017. Contention 2 is modern medicine. Barker 16 explains psychedelics are powerful psychoactive substances that alter perception and mood. They are psychologically safe and do not lead to dependence or addiction. These drugs have tremendous potential. As Oaklander 18 continues, psychedelic drugs can relieve anxiety, depression, PTSD, and addiction. Chang 20 further, psychedelic companies are seeking FDA approval to develop drugs to treat mental disorders. Unfortunately, these substances remain illegal. Morsky 21 confirms only one state and a handful of cities have decriminalized any psychedelics. Legalization is key, as Nielsen 21 quantifies psychedelic drugs are badly needed to address a mental health crisis. Disorders can be prevented with conventional therapies. Only psychedelic drugs have shown the potential to successfully treat these disorders. Psychedelics also prevent the use of hard drugs as a result of their anti-addiction properties. Nielsen 21 writes, 50% of addicts had ceased using opioids by the end of 1 month of treatment. The issue is prevalent, as the National Institute of Mental Health finds 51.5 million U.S. adults live with a mental illness. People with mental health illnesses are structurally hurt, as MHF 21 concludes that they're less likely to find work, live in decent housing, and be included in society. Stigma and discrimination traps people in a cycle of illness. Contention 3 is ending the war. Subpoint A, aerial fumigation. Garden 21 finds Colombia's aerial fumigation has been backed by the U.S. for more than 25 years as a part of the war on drugs. The CTC explains that the practice of aerial fumigation is where harsh chemicals are sprayed from planes at high altitudes. Windy conditions cause herbicide to be blown in non-target areas. Colombia News 14 writes the practice occurs since Colombia is estimated to supply 90% of cocaine that it makes to the U.S. The U.S. gives millions each year to Colombia anti-drug forces and continues to advocate for aerial fumigation. Legalizing drugs ends the need to combat production, ending the practice. The impact is biodiversity. CTC furthers by eradicating large areas of vegetation. Aerial fumigation destroys animal habitats and deprive them from essential food sources, posing a real risk of triggering extinctions in the region. Subpoint B, Black Americans. The war on drugs is a war on Black communities, affirmed to end the devastating impacts of the war. Federal 21 explains the war on drugs was declared by Nixon in 1971 under the pretense of making our communities safer. However, drug enforcement is one of the top justifications used by police systems to target communities. Drugs possession remains the most arrested offense in this country, making it the #1 opportunity for law enforcement assault and killings of Black people to occur. Despite consuming drugs at the same rate, Black people are 5 times more likely than white people to be arrested on drug charges. Arrests echo for a lifetime, limiting career opportunities, access to housing, and educational prospects. Ending the criminalization of drugs will be a powerful step toward dismantling racist policies. Simply legalizing drugs means that we don't arrest people for using drugs. The war on drugs maintains a racist hierarchy and ensures institutional violence is durable and ongoing. Alexander 6 reports a new form of social control exists, as disastrous as Jim Crow, mass incarceration of people of color. Although African American men comprise less than 7% of the population, they comprise half the prison population. Mass incarceration provides the white elite with social benefits. Felon disenfranchisement laws have tilted the scales in favor of the white electorate. 1 in 4 black men has been permanently disenfranchised. Mass incarceration results in fewer legislative seats for communities of color. No one is representing people of color behind bars. And end you affirm.
Are we good for cross?
Yeah, I'm good.
Could I get the first question?
Yeah.
All right. Talking about HIV, you read a piece of link evidence about like legalizing drugs domestically. Then you read an impact evidence about HIV globally. So like, how are we getting from the domestic to link to the global impact?
Okay, so with this, it's basically saying that in the U.S., because we're able to like project like ending the war on drugs and able to project that, oh, we're having like safer and cleaner systems and injection systems, like other people with like HIV like present areas in other countries will see this and end up actually adopting those methods.
Is there a piece of evidence for that, or?
That's just like in like what we're saying in the card, or like saying as like
yeah. Where in the card does it say that?
No, we're like it's an empiric example. Like for example, you see like
yeah.
it's
So
an
do you have
empiric
do
example.
you have a piece of evidence for this empirical example?
Well, no, but we can give you a different example. For example, the U.S. has led like major like changes with climate change, and as you can see in other countries, they also continue to sue and end up like following these like habits. So, for example, you see like activists in the U.S. and you also see activists in different countries when they're striking up because they're following like the hegemony of the U.S.
Wait, what countries are following the U.S. regarding climate change?
Yeah, for example, New Zealand.
What did they do, and how is that related to drug distribution?
Yeah, no, we're saying that because like this is an empiric example of like other countries following like what the US does because it is a global superpower, especially if like these HIV like infected areas, they want to solve like HIV in like the first place, they will like adopt things that do work. So for example, if HIV like in the US would have like safer and cleaner systems, then that would actually help other people. Can I get a question?
We can come back to this. Go ahead.
Okay, so on your second contention about cartels, can you explain the second one, fragmentation, the link card?
Yeah, sure. Basically, what we're saying is right now there's one cartel that's in power, so there's not really much competition. But when you cut revenues, you kind of reduce the gap in between the different cartels. So now the cartels think that they can actually compete with like the bigger, more powerful ones. So they incite violence to try to kill competition. So right now they know they're going to lose. But when you put cartels on an even playing field, competition causes violence. That's what happened in 2008.
Okay.
Can we come back to this HIV thing really quickly?
Right. Yeah.
All right. So I'm very confused because I understand like the US modeling argument, but it's not like made at all in your like contention, right? Because I think that the internal link for like needles not being available is like stigma about HIV and stigma about drugs and things like that. So how would that stigma go away in international countries
Okay.
when the
So
US legalized?
So with this one, because like for example, like stigma is still going to continue either way. It's just that for like in other countries, because like they also have like HIV infected areas, they will see how like the HIV is solving it with like cleaner and safer systems. And because they see that, they will also adopt it in order to prevent HIV from transmitting.
Okay, that's cross. So Hannah, do we need some prep?
Yeah, I'll put my timer up when we start. Okay, that was 37 seconds used. It's just going to be straight down their case. Okay. Is everyone ready? All right. Start with C1 on HIV. First, we would say that there's so many alternative causes. HIV spreads so many different ways, primarily through sexual contact. But then second, we would say that needles are already cheap in the status quo. That's because you can literally buy 100 needles for 100 clean needles for $20 on Walmart. If people have enough like money to access like the black market for drugs right now, that means that they would have enough money to buy these clean needles as well. But then third, we would say that the Pearl and Perez evidence that they read in their own case from 2018 non-unites the entire argument, because it says that there's 3 promising strategies, including syringe access programs, safe injection facilities, and law enforcement assisted division. But the part that they don't read are that these programs are already happening right now in the status quo, which means that we don't need a world post legalization for any of this to happen. But then fourth, we would say that there's PrEP, which is a drug that's already cured HIV and made it livable, which is a prereq, which means that if you take PrEP, then you don't spread HIV, which means that it's being solved in the status quo. But then fifth, we would say that the domestic legalization of the drugs in the nation doesn't help HIV globally. Their link is domestic, but their impact is global. It makes no sense. But then on C2 of psychedelic drugs, first, you can non-unique it because Hartman 21 says that we saw a wave of legislative changes in decriminalization of marijuana in the 70s and 80s, and then California voters passed Prop 2015, and it went from there. And these psychedelic activists are following the same model, especially with President Biden in office. We would say that psychedelics are going to become legalized anyway soon. But then second, we would say that legalizing is not medication, medicalization. There's like 2 different terms. When you legalize something, it doesn't mean that doctors can prescribe them. For example, cocaine can be legalized, but it doesn't mean that the doctors are ever going to like prescribe them to patients, because at the end of the day, the FDA still has to approve it for doctors to prescribe it. And if they're saying that the FDA isn't approving it in the status quo, that's not going to change. But then third, we would say that it doesn't solve the root cause of mental illness. They themselves say only relieve symptoms. We would say there's better treatments like therapy that aren't like chemically activated. But then go to their C3. First, on subpoint A of aerial fumigation, we would say that the U.S. has more incentive for a foreign war on drugs in their world, because they want to protect the legal market and they don't want to be undercut by the illegal market, so you can turn it against them. But then second, they just assert that it ends combat outside with literally no war. Don't let them make a new war. It's too late. The U.S. wants to help other countries fight drugs in Colombia to stop cartels and violence that affects those countries themselves, not only because it affects the U.S. We have always helped their allies when we need it. That won't change in either world. But then go to subpoint B of Black Americans. First, Cooper and Thompson 20 finds that legalization doesn't solve racism. Even in states that have enacted more drug laws, racial disparities in enforcement didn't disappear. An April study from the ALCU found that in every state that has legalized or decriminalized marijuana possession, Black people are still more likely to be arrested for possession than white people. But then second comes from Howard, which is a turn, which tells you that Black people are still more likely in every state that has legalized arrested for possession than white people. In states like Maine and Vermont, racial disparities in weed arrests were worsened after legalization passed because of the continued criminalization of Black markets that still exist outside of the heavily regulated market, and the potential for more widespread drug abuse under legalization in the forms of crimes like DUIs can lead to more interactions with the police, especially for people of color. But then arrest Lincoln, that's because Belling 10 finds that the prisoners that were in for drug-related offenses will now be replaced by surge and arrest for poverty crimes, robberies, and other violent crimes committed by the newly increased populations of addicts and abusers who cannot exist in the legitimate job market. But then Calkins 21 finds that overall the number of drug offenders in state prisons fell by 36% since 2018 for Black Americans, so it's already decreasing. But then Lopez 18 finds that in 2015, 3.4% of all state prisoners were in for drug possession. That's really important because the main 85% of arrests came from drug distribution. We're only legalizing the ability to use a drug, not the ability to distribute a drug. Regulations still exist. But then we would say that we link in a few ways. The first way is because from Smith 21, who finds that every time a city adds a new dispensary, home values will see an increase of $61,000 on average. And that's bad because Udina 20 finds that Denver's green rush results in higher commercial real estate prices. This has heavily impacted low-income residents as warehouse space was previously used by artist cooperatives, food banks, and other small nonprofits. Legalizing marijuana worsens the wealth gap. But then second is because in 2021, several studies found that a greater number of tobacco advertisements and a larger presence of tobacco advertising were in American neighborhoods. For example, the Truth Initiative found that in predominantly Black neighborhoods, there was up to 10 times more money spent on advertising. So if anything, it just gets worse for Black Americans in their world. Thus, we urge a very strong neg vote. Thank you.
Okay, can I call for a few pieces of evidence? Cool. Just the evidence that says Black people were more likely than white people to be arrested, or like any evidence that talks about that. The Howard card, I think that's the one that talks about Vermont, and the card that says the Lincoln cards.
Okay, sure. And you want both Lincolns, right?
Yeah.
Okay. Okay, that's all sent. Let me know when you guys get that.
I just got it. I'm opening it right now. It's loading in. Which cards are which?
The first,
Other than that, I know the Howard one is.
okay, the other three are the Lincolns. The first two are the first Lincoln, and then the last one is the Lincoln I read at the very end.
Okay. Cool. Thank you. I'll take that. Can I also see the Lopez 18 evidence? The one that says majority of people are in prison because of drug possessions.
Sure. Oh, that's Lopez 18 is the 3.4. Do you want Lopez 18, which says that 3.4 is because of possession, or the 85%?
Which one's the 85% one?
I can get that for you if that's what you want.
Okay, I would just ask to send both.
Okay, yeah, sure, I can do that. Oh, Addie, I think you have the 85% card. So I just sent the first one, and then Addie, can you get 85%?
Yeah, sure.
Does it always take this long to send cards in PF? Dang. Y'all built different. And we live streaming?
Okay, I just got them. I'm losing prep. Okay, that is 206 taken. The order will be our constructive and then the net. Is everyone good to go? What? Is everyone good to go? Okay. First, structural violence framing. Varick of Harvard explains that those who assess risks in government, the majority who are white men, focus on the fears of catastrophe and fail to consider the status quo suffering the different communities. Affirming is important. And B, discourse. About for use promotes the discourse surrounding the oppression of Black Americans, since debaters are more likely to read prep on and winning arguments. Discourse abhorrence outweighs because we're winning this argument as solvency. Don't let them make new links to our case in summary. That's new offense and should have been rebuttal. The implications that you should only look at structural violence impacts, not at these big stick impacts that happen with cartels. Now let's go into our case. First go into this Jim Crow argument. First on their Lincoln. One, they say this worsens the gap inequality, but your own card said that this gentrification is not the main cause of this worsening of the gap inequality. But turn the ACLU says Black people onto their second Lincoln. Your own ACLU card turns this argument and says Black people who own dispensaries are arrested in the sense, which means that when you affirm in the world Black people won't be arrested and they'll be able to be actually own dispensaries and become small business owners. Onto more advertising in the first place. The RRR explains that legalization would regulate product advertisement and branding. This historically has been proven with a lack of cigarettes and a plethora of anti-Jill and smoking ads. Also, you can lack of smoking ads. Going to Lopez 18, they say majorities because of drug protection. First, we're not saying that we're solving. You can group all of the responses that talk about how only a small amount of people are in prison because of things like marijuana or because of the things like war on drugs. We are obviously not trying to solve for all racism that ever exists. The whole point of the affirmative is that we take steps in that direction and have some sort of impact to stop any structural violence. Just because something is hard or we don't solve for a complete impact, that is not a reason to affirm in the first place. But then they say Valentine is other violent crimes because of more addicts. Crossplay Nelson from our case, where we tell you that the psychedelics and legalization can actually bring users away from things like addictive substances into more treatment, which will lead less addicts, which means there'll be less addicts in prison because of that. They say Koopser and Thompson show disparities that don't disappear. Once again, we're not trying to solve for everything. Now, group their Black people are more likely to be in prison and their Howard and Vermont cards. This statistics aren't correct because it's a proportional between Black and white people. Obviously, the arrests between Black people are always going to be more than the arrests of white people, but that doesn't matter because it's a proportion. We are saying that the amount of Black people net is going to go down, and that card does not indict that. They say it's already decreasing. We say no. Half of the United States is conservative and hates Black people, and as Trump supporters are racist. You cannot convince half of the United States to start destigmatizing because, frankly, they haven't. Now let's go into their case. On to tobacco. Fernandez findings for 19 finds that legalizing marijuana would decrease lacing, since legal products go through extensive testing processes to ensure their composition, safety, and potency are all in line with regulations. This is empirically true in Colorado and Washington went fully legal 6 years ago. The variety of cannabis products on black market has improved as subpar drugs are not sold anymore. 2. Tobin 21 writes the prospect of legalization would prevent a free-for-all, for example, ensuring vital restrictions are placed on the sale and use by controlling potency. For example, legal alcohol sales do not extend to dangerous combinations containing 100% ethanol or drink at work, and public backlash would stop. This is proven by the fact from the current smoking has declined from 20.9 in 2005 to 14.0. That's AMA, but onto cartels. 1. Their third point on the Warren impact literally concedes that trafficking is still happening regardless of legalization to the same extent, meaning cartel power is non-unique and also kicks their first 2 points on cartels losing power. These are 3 contradictory links in the same contention, and letting them pick one that contradicts the other 2 is ridiculously abusive. But 2, Routers and 20 finds that cartels are already switching to human trafficking. This is because Mustin and 20 writes that coronavirus is dealing a gut punch to illegal drug trade, paralyzing economies, closing borders, and severing supply chains. This process is already happening, which means legalization doesn't change anything. But 3, people use psychedelics. They're cheaper and non-addictive. That's a Nelson 21 cross application that indicates 50% of opioid addicts stopped using opioids after using Ibuprofen, a psychedelic. And drug cartels won't sell psychedelics because they're non-addictive and thus want a revenue stream, but people will still use psychedelics instead because of their health benefits, thus killing any incentive for people to go to the black market. Before, legalization strengthens cartels in two ways. A's, advantages. DuPont finds because of regulations and taxes on growth and sales of legalized drugs, the illegal market is able to thrive by offering considerably lower prices in competition with legal markets. But B, expansion. Galvin in 16 explains legalizing would allow cartels to infiltrate legal markets. This is historically proven, as Warren in 21 finds since California legalized marijuana in 2016, cartels have abandoned farms in Mexico and moved their operations to California, where they can blend alongside legitimate growers. Also, cartels also no link. DuPont in 21 writes traffickers are resourceful and able to rapidly address because they're able to sell their prices well below the legal rate. That's Sling in 21. I'm ready for cross if you are.
Oh, really quickly,
Yeah.
could I get the rhetoric for the framework?
Yes. Is it okay if I send it in NSDA chat? I don't want it to like take too long going through email.
Oh, there's a few more things I want, so.
Okay.
Yeah, I think whatever works for you though. Could I also see the responses to tobacco? And if you read any turns to cartels, I don't think you did, but I wasn't sure about one response. If you read a turn to cartels, could you send that and then tobacco responses and frame?
Okay. Framing tobacco responses, turn on cartels.
If you
Yes.
read one, I wasn't sure.
Okay, we'll get that for you.
Okay, they just got sent over.
Okay, whenever I get those, I'm good for cross. Okay, I think I just got it.
Yeah, I just got it.
You got a first question.
Okay. So let's talk about your response on the gentrification turn. So what does the ACLU evidence have anything to do with the gentrification turn?
Yeah, so the ACLU evidence just says that so it's responding to the evidence that you read the ACLU on.
Wait, I'm confused. What was the point? Like, if you could just
so your Howard card cites an ACLU study that every state has legalized black people are still more likely to be arrested for white people.
Right, but our Howard card is not involved in the gentrification turn.
Oh, sorry, it's the Unta 20 card. I think I just missaid ACLU for some reason. Your card says in the unhighlighted part that many Denver residents do not believe cannabis was the primary cause of gentrification in the city. And then we say that there is a piece of evidence that you read, which is the Marshall Project evidence, Will Drug Legalization Leave Black People Behind by Cooper, Christie, and Thompson. And that piece of evidence says that black people have like dispensaries, they own them as small business owners, but racial disparities continue because they're being arrested because of that.
Wait, but what does that have to do with gentrification? My question is, what is the link between arrest and gentrification?
Like, we're telling you that you're like you're saying like, I'm sorry, I'm confused. What's the question?
Right. So you're just responding to like the whole idea of like whether arrests increase or not. You're not actually responding to gentrification, are you?
We're responding to the trend that says legalizing marijuana worsens the racial wealth gap because of gentrification, because your piece of evidence says that cannabis was not the main cause of gentrification where the evidence happened.
No, it says that the people don't believe it. But my question is what's okay, I mean, we've been on this for a while. You can take a question.
Okay. So on just like a question on your cartel's third point. So if you can see like trafficking is happening in the status quo with things like opioids and other legal drugs, then how does your first and second point stand if those contradict that third point?
Wait, how do the first and second point contradict the third one?
Because the third point talks about how the drug market is flourishing right now and that it's continuing to traffic legal substances. And then your first and second point talk about how legalization increases drug prices because they'll shift to profitable revenues, but they've already done that with legal drugs in the status quo.
Right. So the legal drugs point is only about California, but how does that contradict drug violence decreasing through diversification? Because the diversification point just says like the warranting behind that is that if cartels like if their source of revenue of like drugs is removed, they have so many other forms of revenue that they can easily diversify to, like human trafficking, not drug trafficking, human trafficking, and like other violent crimes against humans. So what's the contradiction there?
Like the contradiction is that cartels are flourishing right now in a legal market. And you're saying that when we legalize, cartels will not flourish and shift to more profitable revenue streams. Like, how are those not contradictory?
We're not saying they are like flourishing right now.
Wait, your tagline literally says cartels still flourish in a legal drug market. Morris 13 explains.
Sorry, which card?
Morris 13, like cartels are flourishing in the legal drug market.
Yeah.
Okay, and then
so we say that if you legalize all drugs, then cartels will continue to flourish even more.
Oh, sorry, we're like way over time.
Okay, but it's basically just like if you legalize all drugs, that same thing happens like all over the country.
Okay.
Addie, are we taking prep? Okay, I'll put my timer up. I'm pausing prep. Just to be clear, there were 2 responses under Big Tobacco.
There were 3.
Okay, could you send the 3?
Yes. Like the cards or what the responses are?
What the responses are, like the rhetoric.
Sure. They're not like completely written out. They're kind of just like bullet points. Do you want me to just tell you?
That's fine. That's fine. If they're bullet points, that's okay.
Okay. Okay, since it's just rhetoric, I'm gonna send them in the chat. For the third one, I found like the actual rhetoric for it in the file, so I do have the rhetoric for that one.
Okay, that's fine. I'll resume prep when I put my hand up. Okay, that was 216 used.
Sorry, I couldn't find the window. Oh, so can you mute on this call? Okay, perfect. So the order is going to be, it's going to be quickly on the framework, their case, and then our C1 big tobacco. Okay.
Sorry, can I get the order again? I don't want to be that person, but
That's fine. Sorry. A framework, your C3 or your last argument, and then our first argument, big tobacco.
okay.
We'll concede the framework. Structural violence worsens in their world for 3 reasons. The first is increasing mass incarceration. Uniqueness flows aft. That's because the evidence Sahana reads tells you that the number of drug offenders in state prisons fell by 36% since 2018, and that was in April this year. Their response was Trump is racist. I agree 100%, but the statistics show that we're actually reducing the amount of mass incarceration specific to drug offenders and people of color. That being said, when you legalize drugs, it's going to come with strict regulations on other aspects such as distribution. These regulations are policed unfairly. Also, these regulations increase interactions with Black people and the police. That leads to more arrests and things like police shootings. They say our statistic from Howard 18 is bad, but the warranting is very, very good, goes unresponded. The warrant is very simple. More regulations means more interaction with the police. This leads to more arrests, which is why in Vermont and Maine, we saw worsening disparities of arrests after legalization. Like, this warrant is completely clean. So right now we're seeing a decrease. When you legalize, you're going to see an increased amount of arrests due to drug possession. The second link is increasing gentrification. They make a few responses saying that currently Black people own dispensaries and are being arrested, but that isn't responsive because our argument's very simple. When big tobacco takes over marijuana, they're going to have the ability to build dispensaries wherever they want. And the argument is that that big tobacco is going to push out the minorities that currently own dispensaries. That's one way we harm minorities. The second way is that big tobacco wants to build dispensaries in low-income neighborhoods. That's why in Denver, when they legalized, what we saw was the price of real estate and the price of housing go up when you build dispensaries, which increased gentrification. This leads to poor neighborhoods with people of color with worse resources and worse schools and more cyclical poverty. Another reason as to why structural violence flows out. The third is advertising. They say there's going to be regulations on advertising, but Jacobs 18 finds that if you allow dangerous products to be sold, then seek to impose advertising restrictions, the state will face tight constitutional restraints. The card continues that the court emphasized repeatedly that regulators may not suppress advertising of a product and audience, even when the public health dangers of overuse are acknowledged and indisputable. That means even once you legalize it, it's very difficult for the state constitutionally to impose regulations, and that means big tobacco is going to market 10 times more towards Black people. You're going to see an increased use of marijuana and cigarettes for people of color. Again, another way that you see structural violence decrease because it's a public health hazard. they have a few responses to big tobacco. They might try to cross apply, so I'm just going to respond to them individually. They say there's going to be regulations. There's so many problems with that. First, empirics disproves big tobacco has been avoiding regulations for like the last 50 years regarding cigarettes. Then they say that but also I'd argue that big tobacco has the ability to lobby the government. So there's not going to be like large amounts of regulations because they have the power to change it. Then I would argue that big tobacco is not afraid of the public eye. They've been in the public eye for 50 years. They're very good at it. And then the last response, and you can cross-apply the response I just made, saying that it's very difficult for the government to regulate after they just legalized. That being said, they also concede a bunch of the mitigation on their case. So if anything, they literally have no offense. Like we link into framework a lot better than them. Are we? Oh.
We're gonna take prep.
That was prep, but can we call for a piece of evidence? The Jacobs card, and also.
Yeah, sure.
Where's the other one?
Oh, Addie, you're muted.
You guys said there was an empirics disproves big tobacco awards right now. Was that a piece of evidence or was that just something else?
That's just what big tobacco has done with cigarettes for the last 60 years. I can find the piece of evidence if you want it by the end of your speech, but no, it wasn't a piece of evidence.
Okay, so then it would just be the Jacobs card.
It's already sent over. I was muted, but I already sent it.
Oh, I just got the Jacobs evidence from Addie, so.
I haven't seen one of those in so long.
All right, is everyone ready? No? Okay. All right. The timer. I got it. So first, let's extend sexual violence. So they also conceded. So discourse about for us promotes the discourse surrounding the oppression of like Black Americans. Debaters are more likely to read it and prep out winning arguments. Discourse weren't outweighs because word winningness in an argument has solvency. So also don't let them make new links to our like case in summary. That's like a new offense. It should be in rebuttal. Extension on subpoint B on contention 3. This is war on drugs is a war against African Americans. Federic finds that drug possession is one of like the most arrested offense in the country for Black Americans who are disproportionately targeted. Arrests limit like career opportunities, access to housing, and educational prospects in the future, which is why Alexander concludes that the mass incarceration is as a result of the war on drugs maintains a racist hierarchy designed to disenfranchise Black individuals. Thankfully, affirming this like removes the criminalization of Black communities and removes any incentives to actually continue the war on drugs. Overall, all their like arguments against this are like unwarranted at best and mitigated at best. Any risk of offense is a reason like why to vote on our Wayne, which we're winning. Okay, now on to their responses on this. first they say that drug overdoses fell in April. How we were like actually reducing like drug offenders. How reducing like drug offenders like fell in April. However, that's also like not true. Even like you see even more mass like incarcerations of people in like the state, and also on answer to that, like other cars will say like arrests went up, but like the proportion, or like will not say like arrests went up, but the proportion between like black and white like arrests went up. That like doesn't matter because we're still solving for the rest of like thousands of people like not going to prison. And on to regulations, they say like even more regulations mean even more like even more arrests. However, that's like not warranted. Like just because there are regulations, for example, on like on alcohol or like other like things like that, there aren't like, or tobacco, there is like no other like arrest on that. And they also say like on like tobacco, not scared of the go on to the Howard, they move on to more regulations is like more arrests. Where like talk about, you can just cross apply that on now go on to their case. So on tobacco, they say that tobacco is like not scared of like the public eye. However, extend the AMA evidence that says like tobacco rates have already gone down because of advertising. This is because you like don't see like cigarette ads like right now. In fact, like counter companies will actually put things out of like anti-jewel and anti-smoking, which is why we like seeing this decrease. Tobacco companies are also scared of like public backlash, which is why they like tone down these ads empirically. Extend fairness, they say like the court like emphasize, however, you can't suppress that, and states have already passed those regulations, but now like onto cigarettes ads and etc. On our case, their own evidence says the green project was like not the main reason for gentrification. Also turn on your card, the ACLU study said that black people occupying dispensaries are actually arrested because they're illegal and because the system is racist. That's why space is available in the first place, because they were arrested. This also turns to because like the root issues we've discussed. They also say more interactions with the police. However, one, they like also can see that their statistics are proportional between like black and whites, which means that like on net black arrests have gone down. And also 2 point, they also say more interaction with police. However, in legalization means minimal solvency. That's the whole point of like mass incarceration, is like deeply rooted in the war on drugs, and we are like solving the main issue. And thus you basically also they say like rate falling, it's not fast enough. Our like conservative rate states will still prevent this, and thus you affirm.
Are we good for Grand Cross?
Give me a second.
Okay.
Okay, I'm good for Grand Cross.
Okay, can I take the first question real quick?
Yeah, sure.
What's the last thing you said in summary? Like it was like the very last thing you added.
So they say rate falling, it's not fast enough. Conservative states will still would prevent that.
Like, just to clarify, you guys say like the rate is falling. We'd say that we want to solve for structural violence as soon as possible. There's like no reason we should wait for the rate to fall and more people to go to prison. The second one is that
we agree. That was just to say that the uniqueness is on our side, right? So it's like right now the trend is that mass incarceration is falling, but if we vote AF, or if we vote neg, if we vote AF, you will change that.
Okay, and then the second response was the argument that conservative states wouldn't allow the rate to continue falling in the world of the neg because they are racist and don't care about black people and like.
But I'm so confused, right? Because our statistic finds that from 2018 to April of 2021, what we saw was that mass incarceration due to drug possessions fell by 36%, specifically for black people. During that time, Trump was in office, so I don't understand how that's responsive, as insofar as
sure, so it's responsive because your statistics evidence doesn't tell us what states in those rates actually fell. We're giving you an analysis of the legislation and what type of people would stop that rate from falling.
There's always going to be conservative Americans. That doesn't mean we can't see prison reform. Like prison reform is happening right now, regardless of conservative Americans, or in spite of them. Sure, whatever.
Well,
but
there's actually a lot of problems like with prison reform being passed in Congress, and like a lot of that's like why we haven't solved like mass incarceration. There's a lot of just like racist people in this country. If that was true and the rate had been continue falling, then like we wouldn't have things like mass incarceration. Can I have a question?
Sure, go ahead. That's fine.
Okay, Jessica, did you have a specific question or no?
If you don't have a question, could I quickly clarify something from summary? I just didn't hear something.
Sure. Yeah.
What responses were extended on mass incarceration? Because there was proportion, it's the proportion, not the number of arrests. And then the second one was something about arrests on tobacco, but I didn't hear it.
Let me check.
But in the meanwhile,
Yeah, so on that, it was we extended the on tobacco they're not scared of like the public eye. They extend like the AMA evidence. We said like the tobacco rates have already gone down because of advertisement.
Okay, so you're saying that the government can advertise against against marijuana?
No, we're saying that there's always going to be like. Can you mute yourself? There's an echo.
Yeah, sure.
Okay, so we're saying that there's always going to be like increased backlash and a counterforce. So an example is like there's like anti-Juul commercials that we see on TV where it's like teens stop smoking and they like sign the cigarette and then they roll up the cigarette.
Yeah, no. The issue is it took like 40 years for that to literally like 40 years for that to happen. And as in so far as like people, I still know people that smoke cigarettes. Like clearly, like I still think that this advertising is not effective. And even if that were true, it doesn't solve the root cause, which is big tobacco, like intentionally spending more money to advertise towards.
Right, you just said that that type of marketing isn't effective. You said that type of marketing isn't effective. So how would like marketing be effective?
Just, like, solving a symptom, right? Like you're letting them advertise like marijuana more towards people of color, and then saying, "Oh, the government can like advertise."
No, but you just said that like because like we're like marketing, like that marketing doesn't work. You still see like, oh, people like smoking today. Okay, so how would like marketing like increase people who use marijuana?
So I'm talking about big tobacco's marketing, or when big tobacco takes over marijuana, not the government, but we're over time.
I think we have 16 and like 7 seconds of prep left. So I'll run that when I put my hand up.
Check your text. Well, yeah.
Okay. The order is going to be it's going to be our first Lincoln on mass incarceration, the second Lincoln on gentrification, and then weighing at the bottom. Okay. Oh, and on mass incarceration, I'll talk about their case too. Okay. Is everyone ready? Okay. Starting with mass incarceration, this is going to be the easiest place to vote in the round. That's because they give you two responses that are just flowed through. And the first one is that it was the proportion of people that went up. Our evidence clearly says that it was the number of arrests that went up. They try to muddle it. It's the number of arrests that increases. You can look at the evidence. But then second, they say that there's arrests on tobacco and the AMA has made the advertising decrease. First of all, we would say this has nothing to do with the link. But second of all, we would say that even for this advertising to happen, it took decades, but it's still happening right now on a large scale, and the root cause is not getting solved. All the responses that again they were never responded to. But then on their case, they don't get any offense here because they never solve for anything, because the new regulation that we talk about that happens in the AF world when all drugs are legalized means that these regulations would be policed unfairly, and the same amount of people will be in jail. And if anything, it's an increased amount of people, which means you can extend the Lincoln that when you legalize all drugs, it increases the amount of racist policies and racist policing within communities, which leads to more interaction between Black people and the police, which leads to more arrests. That warranting has literally gone unresponded to throughout the entire round. It's an easy ballot there. But then let's go on to the gentrification argument. Again, another really easy place to vote. That's because they make two responses again. One, they say that marijuana wasn't the main reason for gentrification. First, that was a court analysis according to the people. The statistics and the evidence say otherwise. But then second, even if that's true, we still gain small offense, even if it is a reason contributing to gentrification, because gentrification is so large scale. But then second, they say that Black owners, Black owners would get arrested of marijuana facilities. We would say again, this doesn't have anything to do with the argument, because it doesn't, because a few Black owners getting arrested doesn't compare to entire communities of impoverished people getting gentrified. And the second thing is that we would actually say more Black business owners would be pushed out of business when these large tobacco firms come in. But then at that point, let's go to weighing. On to weighing. Literally all of their impacts about mass incarceration get taken out by ours, because ours says that the number of people getting arrested increases, whereas they're just trying to say the number of people getting arrested decreases. But then also I would say we outweigh on scope through gentrification, because gentrification affects whole communities all the way throughout the United States. So not only individual people. So thus we urge a very strong vote. Thank you.
Okay. We can have the table. Oh, hold on. We needed to fix the mic for the thing. Okay, is everyone good to go? I can't see everyone. Okay, I'm just gonna assume that's a yes. The order's gonna be tobacco, our case. First on big tobacco, there's a few reasons why they don't gain offense on this argument. The first one is Top 21, which prevents that it would prevent a free-for-all by ensuring vital restrictions are not placed on sale use. We read to this AMA evidence that shows you that as public backlash, there has actually been an empiric decrease from 20.9% in 2005 to 14.0% in 2019 that the AMA finds because of it because of something like public backlash. These companies would want to pay attention to them in the first place. This was a considered response and empiric, which means you should on net prefer it because it's based on previous study. But then they say that you can't suppress advertisement after legislation, but states have actually already regulated these advertisements right now, which means after legalization, nothing has to happen for them to regularize anymore. They say they're not afraid of the public eye, but once again, there have been counter ads that have come up, and additionally, the tobacco usage has decreased as a result of these ads. So of course, these companies would be afraid. That's why empirically, you don't see things like cigarette ads on the TV right now. Prefer them empirically because you know it's happening and you've seen it. Now go on to our case. First, they tried to go for this number of arrests that went up and increased. One, we still have little solvency because Jessica tells us that even though there's a police attack, it isn't because of the root cause for war on drugs. Even though there are interactions with the police, the main amount of interactions with the police right now, and the main excuse that police use is because of the war on drugs and racism. That is so entrenched in our society that if we get rid of that, and yes, there's still maybe a little more racism in other sectors like property management, we're still having solvency. Once again, we're not trying to solve for all racism, but then they say even if the rate is falling right now, one, we're going to extend that conservative states would never allow this to happen and that the rate is not that fast. But then the whole thing they're staking this argument on is their gentrification argument. First, they say, we tell you that this is, their own evidence tells you that that is not the main reason that gentrification is happening from Black communities. That is literally coming from the people who live there in the first place, which means you should prefer those minorities' voices over whatever they said when they power tagged and recut this card, which means this is non-responsive. But then they talk about low-income communities. But Jessica tells you this has nothing to do with the argument because Black people are being arrested, and their dispensaries are being taken away, which is why land is open in the first place. Because Black people are being arrested, land is being opened, and people can't actually revitalize their economies. We are stopping the root cause of the turn you're going for.
Good round, everybody.
Good round.
Good round.
All right, we're all in. Is everybody here? Is the other okay for sure. Congratulations to both teams for reaching the triples of the Sunvite. Decision was a 2-1 for the negative from Corey Lane. Did I say that right? Okay, for sure. Okay, I sat. It seems like the round comes down to which world is better for Black people, less arrests or more gentrification. Thanks. And considering that there was no in the final speeches, there wasn't much like this is worse than the other. It's like, well, it's like granted, it's kind of hard to do that. It seems like I have to do work for both teams. While I don't think like arrests from drugs go away entirely, I do think there's less arrests, period, in the world of the AF, just because people aren't getting locked up for possession, especially when like that one defensive card about weed is just not extended at all. So it's like there's less arrests in the world of the plan. That seems better than being pushed out of your community, which is like not the thing I want to say, but it's how the chips fall. Thing I think for the neg, I think the card you have about like Black people still get arrested even in a world of legalization. I feel like the way we're talking about it is like kind of weird. So like the card isn't about like regulations are enforced disparately. It's like people like you still have a plug. Like even though you can go to a dispensary, you still have a plug because a plug is cheaper and your plug is going to get arrested. And it's also like DUIs because there's more interactions with the police, but like the way it gets explained is like, oh, regulations get enforced differently, which is there's more arrests. But like, I don't know. This is an argument that the app should have made, but like when a regulation is enforced, it's like a fine on the business. It's not we're gonna lock all y'all up unless it's like repeated violations, whatever. But I do think there are net less arrests in the world of the AF than in the because the war on drugs is over, kind of. And then how that interacts with gentrification, it was hard because like the neg evidence is solid. It's like even if gentrification is not like the factor, it's a factor. Like that's important. But there's no weighing of is gentrification worse than mass incarceration or the war on drugs and the status quo. So what do you go ahead?
I was actually going to ask, what if you had to weigh those things? Like, how would you go about that? Because it's like we kind of knew we should be doing it, but we just didn't know like how to do it.
Instead of weighing them, I would just be like, gentrification means people get put back in jail because if you get pushed out of your community, it's like, where do you go? Maybe you get desperate. You got to do something to feed your family. Boom, bam, you're in jail on something petty. Like that was the back and forth I had in my head. I was like, well, gentrification, people probably go back to jail and it's not good. But no one said that.
Yeah.
You just put everybody in a weird spot, especially the non-Black people. It's like all of y'all. So, it's just really weird for Ariel or Ariel to be like, yeah, when it comes to the darkies or the Blacks, I just, I don't know if I prefer incarceration or gentrification. It's just a weird spot to put everybody in. So just do the weighing, do the turns case yourself. Sorry, I didn't mean to call you out, but all right, I'll stop talking. Go ahead.
Yeah, no worries. So I voted for Corey Lane. I think that the Howard evidence that's read in response to the incarceration arguments is actually, I think it's like partly problematic, but I think it's problematic for the reasons that Heritage isn't calling Corey Lane out on. Like Heritage does call out the first part of the card that's like the proportion of incarceration is like still pretty similar. But then in the latter half of the evidence, it's pretty clear that like in Maine and Delaware, the incarceration of like Black Americans did go up after the legalization of drugs. And I think that's the part that Corey Lane was extending, and they were extending it pretty consistently. So I kind of do buy that incarceration does increase after you pass after you legalize illicit drugs, I guess. That being said, I also kind of like looked at like the ACLU like dispensary turn, but I don't know, like it wasn't all that well implicated. And then also I think that the Howard evidence responds to it pretty well. Like the warranting of the Howard evidence was pretty clear in saying that like more like police interactions lead to more arrests, and that like when you impose regulations, that's what happens. Maybe I interpreted that wrong, but I think that like responded to the ACLU term sufficiently. So like the dispensary ACLU term kind of like wasn't that important. And like gentrification, whatever. I agree. It wasn't like really well weighed, but I kind of just voted off like the Howard evidence, and like I think the turn's pretty clean, and the warranting is conceded by American Heritage, and I don't think they're indicting the right parts of that card, because right under where it says like Delaware and Maine saw high rates of incarceration, it says like California saw lower rates of incarceration. So AHS, I'd suggest like you guys just read that a little more and indict that instead of like just a top part talking about proportions. Because it also caught, like I also saw proportions, and I'm like, this isn't really good evidence, and then I kept on reading, and like it was saying what Corey Lane was like claiming it said.
Do you have any questions?
Yeah, I have one question. So, is there winning final focus for the AF, and like what would that final focus look like?
I think there is. I think that you can probably still shed some doubt on the Howard evidence and still win. Especially like I feel like it would have been better if it started. I feel like that was the most, I guess, like damning piece of evidence of like the whole like incarceration debate, because it is pretty clear. Like the warranting that Corey Lane is saying is like what the card is saying, right? But there's other sketchy parts of the card that you guys could have called out on, and I think that would have just made the round a lot closer, because I wasn't really convinced by the gentrification arguments, because it's just like not weighed at all. It was just kind of like there. And so the only thing that like was kind of warranted and weighed was like the incarceration on the Corey Lane side. So shedding some doubt on like that piece of evidence, because there were pieces that were really sketch, would have been better. But the proportion stuff is true, but the second part of the card is like pretty clear.
I think because the AF is still legalize all drugs, I think you could just be like this is about weed, but black people get arrested for drugs that aren't weed. So like arrest, like I don't know. Part of me is like, you just got to put all your cards on the table and be like, look, no one gets arrested for drugs anymore. They might get arrested for DUIs. They don't get arrested. They might get arrested for being the plug, but like, would they even get arrested for that if it's like legal? Because shouldn't you be able to sell, possess however much you want, distribute however much you want, grow? I mean, like, yeah, if those are things that are like not true, that's fine. That's like a debate to be had. But you could just put those things out in the world and be like, no one gets arrested for drugs ever. So what do they get arrested for? Competing? But we're a free market economy. Come on. Let the mom and pop plug thrive in the face of big tobacco. I don't know. But you could just be like, look, arrests go down, period. Boom, bam. Nobody gets arrested for cocaine. Nobody gets arrested for crack. There's more and more distinction. Black people can do shrooms. They chillin'. Black people can do meth and fentanyl. For whatever reason, they're chilling. And like, we got this one card's about weed. But like every drug ever. Because Nixon and Reagan weren't black people up for weed. It was all about crack and the distinction between crack and cocaine. Like, just if we're gonna talk about the war on drugs, talk about like the war on drugs. Don't just talk about marijuana.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Happy New Year. Be safe.